If you've been skimming through internet forums looking for answers for your hardware-related problems, you've probably already noticed that there aren't many things that all gamerkind can unanimously agree upon. But whether you're on Team Red or Team Green, the fact remains that building a gaming PC isn't cheap, especially seeing how many GPUs cost more than entire gaming consoles. And if you're trying to put together a powerful configuration, well, let's just say that the overall cost can get overwhelming. Bear in mind that we're not even taking into consideration the occasional market conditions that can make prices skyrocket to levels of utmost absurdity. With such a pricey undertaking, it's easy to see why many gamers turn to buying second-hand graphics cards in order to build their dream PC while still meeting the unforgiving budgetary restraints. But is buying used graphics cards safe, or is it just too big of a risk? Unfortunately, the line between these two options is both fine and blurry. Sometimes it's a surefire yes. Other times it's a definite no. But most often it's a very dubious maybe. There are too many variables for us to say yes or no and call it a day. But worry not, because in this video we'll be going over all of the individual variables so that you can always answer this question yourself. So without any further ado, let's begin. First things first, we have to talk about where it's safe to buy used graphics cards. Only, here's the thing. The internet is too large a place for us to choose one site and say, alright everything, this is it, this is where you should go if you're looking to buy used graphics cards. But what we can say is this. Even the utmost trustworthy sites have had their fair share of online shopping horror stories. These things are inevitable. Part of the reason is the fact that people are more likely to complain on the internet than they are to sing songs of praise. You order a product, it arrives damaged, and this starts a whole dispute. And soon enough, we can all read about this on Reddit or even some online news outlets. But if you order a product and it arrives in perfect condition, you just give the seller a 5-star rating and move on with your life. eBay, Craigslist, and even the hardware swap subreddit have thousands of fluid sales for every scam or faulty delivery. So our advice is this. It's more important to look for a good seller than it is to look for a site without any horror stories attached to it. Check the seller. If they've got good ratings and feedback scores, and preferably lots of them, then chances are they're as reliable as they come. On the other hand, no matter how good their offer may be, it's best to avoid sellers with negative ratings. And as for sellers who may not have a negative score but appear to be new, it's best to take a cautious approach. A good reputation is everything on these sites, so it's best to stick to the sellers who have earned theirs and shown that they intend to keep it. Now, as for the sites themselves, the two main ones we have to mention are eBay and Craigslist. Craigslist has the benefit of proximity, so you can often just get a chance to inspect the goods in person before committing to a purchase. But unfortunately, there is no protection or insurance here whatsoever. eBay, on the other hand, has a reliable money-back guarantee policy that you can turn to should the transaction prove problematic. The policy is a no-nonsense refund for faulty or broken items or those that don't match the listing. Most importantly, eBay is more than willing to step in and act as a mediator should the seller try to play hardball, and they have a tendency of siding with the buyer. So if you're looking to minimize the risk factor, looking for a reliable seller on eBay is a good place to start. Next up, we have to consider a very tricky question. You want to save some money when all's said and done, right? That is the whole point of buying a second-hand graphics card in the first place. But if the price seems a little too good to be true, then it probably is. A good rule of thumb is to look at the MSRP and reduce that price by about 20 to 30%. It's important to note that this isn't an exact science, and there are other factors to take into account, such as the state of the graphics card sold, to give one example. But if we had to give a rough percentage estimate, this would be it. If the price of the used graphics card isn't lower by at least 20%, then there's little incentive to go secondhand in the first place. In this case, it would be way better to just pay the full price and avoid the risk factor entirely. But if the used graphics card is being sold for pocket change, then you probably don't even want to know what state it's in. Sure, every so often you'll come across a seller who's offering a good graphics card for dirt cheap just because they want to sell it as soon as possible, but these are the exceptions and not the rule. Now, the next point we have to go over is which graphics cards are even worth buying secondhand in the first place. Obviously, your gaming requirements, budget, and personal preference will play a huge part when deciding on the right graphics card for you, but there are still a couple of other things to consider. For example, you should not only take the age of the graphics card into consideration, but also its architecture. Newer graphics cards generally tend to use newer architecture, but this isn't always the case. Sometimes a new line of graphics cards will use the same architecture as the previous one, just with a higher clock speed. The newer the architecture, the better the card will handle newer games. On the other hand, older architectures aren't as optimized or power efficient as newer ones, and might not support newer technologies. They do have the benefit of being cheaper, so if you're pinching for pennies, this is the way to go. But at the very least, make sure you've considered all of your options. And finally, if you want to play it safe, make sure the card you're buying isn't older than 2 years. The reason for this is quite simple. Most manufacturers offer 3-year warranties on their GPUs, so if the card isn't older than 2 years, you still have at least a full year left on the warranty. This can help mitigate the risk of buying a used graphics card and present a lifeline in case you end up with a faulty component after all. Just remember, not all OEMs can be trusted when it comes to warranties. MSI, for example, is notorious for moving the warranty goalpost in order to avoid accepting warranty requests. So overall, the prep work for buying used graphics cards is the same as when buying a new one with just a couple of added steps. You check the benchmarks, read the reviews, and make sure that the OEM is reliable when it comes to warranties, just as you would when buying a new graphics card. And then you also make sure that the graphics card is no older than 2 years and is sold by a reliable seller. All in all, we recommend getting an Nvidia model if you're buying an older card, since they do tend to stand the test of time a bit better than AMD ones. But again, we know that preference plays a huge role here, so just remember to look up how old or how new the architecture is. The next point may seem a bit silly, but presentation and packaging can tell you a lot by how the seller has been treating the graphics card you're looking to buy. PC components are very fragile by nature. They require regular care to maintain a consistent level of performance over long periods. And the people who keep the original packaging, documentation, and the all-important anti-static bag generally tend to make for more reliable sellers. These are also generally the people who buy a graphics card with the very intent of selling it down the line, so they make sure that the card is in best condition possible. If you can see dust covering the shroud of the card and clogging up the heatsink, you turn around and you run. Reliable sellers know what they're doing, so not only do they keep the card clean, they also provide multiple photos of it from different angles so that you can judge for yourself the state that it's in. They've got nothing to hide and they want you to know it. So if the seller has a good score on whatever site they're selling, provides plenty of pictures from many angles, and keeps the original box and documentation, then you're more likely than not looking at a solid graphics card being sold by a reliable seller. Also, feel free to ask the seller for additional information like new photos, questions about the card's history, or even benchmark results. Conscientious sellers will be more than happy to oblige. In fact, one of the most important questions you'll want to ask the seller about the card's history is whether or not it was used for cryptocurrency mining. You remember cryptocurrency, right? The thing that drove hardware prices up the roof because everyone wanted to get in on that Bitcoin craze and honest gamers could suddenly not even afford a decent mid-range PC without taking a second mortgage on a house. Yeah, the whole thing just kind of crashed, and some of the people who bought tens or even hundreds of graphics cards to get ahead of the competition are still looking for ways to sell them off. Only you shouldn't buy cards that were used for mining, since this was a very intensive task, so the cards are bound to have some significant wear and tear, even if they hadn't been used for very long. Of course, some miners want longevity and take extra precautions not to burn their GPUs out, but the key word here is some, and some pales in comparison to the many that don't mind overclocking to the extreme so as to maximize their profits. So the way things stand, buying a card used for mining is a real gamble. It's not worth it in general, and this goes double for if you're spending some serious dough on a high-end card. And that about does it for the things you need to know about buying a used graphics card. In summation, it's more important to look for a reliable seller as an individual than a reliable site as a whole, because at the end of the day, you'll be purchasing the card from the individual and not the site. Also, it's best to be wary of cards that go for half the MSRP or so. Ideally, you should try and buy cards from sellers who keep the original packaging and documentation. Architecture is more important than age. And finally, avoid graphics cards that have been used for mining. So long as you follow these few simple steps, you should do just fine. There is always going to be some risk factor when buying secondhand hardware, but these are few pointers that could help you mitigate it substantially. So if you're looking to save money, buying a used graphics card is a fine course of action. And in case you've decided against it, check out the link in the description that will take you to our article where we list out the best graphics cards 2019 has to offer. In any case, we hope that this video has been some help to you. If it has, you can help us out by liking it and subscribing to our channel. And also, if you have friends who you think could benefit from seeing this, help them out by sharing this video. Also, if you want to see more videos like this one, we highly suggest clicking on the bell icon so that you can get notifications whenever a new video gets uploaded. We upload new videos regularly, so keep your eyes peeled for the next one. In the meantime, may your games be fun and your losses few. And as always, we'll see you next time on Gaming Scan.